been on the Board of Governors for a number of years.
Sure.
So could you, I think one of the things as part of setting the stage for it is to understand how you got connected with All Hallows and what's kept you connected, and especially through some of the difficult past years that we've had financially. And so just your connection and your interest in it and what you value in it.
I think it was twofold. When I was growing up in County Clare, my mother's brother was ordained in All Hallows and went to England after that. So he was ordained in 1937, and he used to come back to Ennis every year for his summer holidays.
Okay.
So we were brought up with the stories about All Hallows and his time here, and the friends he would meet when he came home were all Hallows people.
Yeah.
So he actually married my mother and father, and then 27 years later he married Margaret and myself.
Oh, really?
And he was a very special man.
In Ennis, was it?
In Dublin.
Oh, in Dublin.
Dublin,
okay.
Yeah. And then he was about to marry my sister when he died suddenly, aged 57.
Oh, wow.
So that was a big shock because he had been, the embodiment of, I suppose, everything that was good about Catholic priests at the time. And the family went over to the funeral in Liverpool, and the appreciation that they had for him was just amazing. So we had a great sort of sense of regard for All Hallows as a place, never having been here. Just knew it as a place that produced great people.
Yeah.
And then many years later, a friend of Mark Noonan's was a friend of mine, and just mentioned that he was in the throes of looking for I suppose advice as to how he would replace the financial director who was retiring. And she knew me well, and she suggested maybe I'd come in and talk with him, because my field was corporate finance and dealing with a lot of executives. So I came in and met with Mark, and we chatted about how we might do this, and he found...
that was in early
2009, 2000 or thereabouts. And from then it started, and that was my first exposure to, you could call it, the academic world. I was coming from the commercial world, the for-profit sector, the mode of thinking, the attitude, everything was quite different.
Very different.
So I remember asking him one day just to outline the organisational structure that was here. And I just said to him, Mark, that's amazing. Academic councils, board of governors, board of trustees, finance committees, and he was in there in the centre of it all. And I said, in the commercial world, this just would not work, but maybe in this world. So for me, it was a major shift in the mindset, and I was about to retire, and I just felt that this would be quite a challenge. So he asked me would I come on the board of governors, and I said I would. I'd be delighted to see what I could help with. But it coincided really with, I suppose, a major tsunami coming at All Hallows in many directions.
Yeah.
So that's how I got involved.
So you weren't used to budgeting for a loss, were you?
No.
In the corporate world?
No. That was one of our big discussions. That, I suppose...
You're welcome to join us if you'd like.
The college had been running a deficit of about 600,000, 700,000 a year, and that had been funded by the sale of land, which was very saleable up on Griffith Avenue. And a pool of money then had been formed, or been put in and invested in a trust, and that trust was sustaining the college, and it was like a great big Mother Hubbard. It disguised the real problems that were there, and the need for a very major strategic review. But I think just around that time, the recession was beginning to bite very deeply. There were challenges psychologically and financially all over Ireland. And a number of major things happened, which I think were really very difficult for All Hallows. The external environment was such where the Education Authority wanted more consolidation, wanted outputs related to secular and profit-making activities, which was driving values very much so. And they produced this report, and I don't think All Hallows was even mentioned in it, or if it was very, very minutely. And a lot of the other colleges, like St. Patrick's or Mater Dei, were aligning themselves much more intimately with bigger establishments. And All Hallows, whilst it had DCL...
They also had a greater subsidy, didn't they?
Yes.
From the state, yeah.
They did, yeah. So All Hallows didn't quite have that. And I think then the other big challenge that it faced was, on that external side, all of the investment trusts that had been put in place, not alone in All Hallows, were being hit very badly because property had been a big baseline for many of these trusts. Property values collapsed by 50-60%. So All Hallows lost in that. And it probably lost maybe 2 years of the contribution that the trust could have made, which was a big hit in terms of the time span that they would have had to solve the problem. And I think the other thing was the amount of management change that took place. If you're going into a crisis, you need to have experienced management people. And Mark Noonan retired. The chairman of the Board of Governors was Oliver Maloney, and he got sick and had to retire. The finance director was replaced by another finance director who then reached retirement age. And Brian Moore, who was the head of the Vincentians, died suddenly. So that sort of corporate expertise that you would have needed in the best of times and which you really needed for the difficult times that were coming was missing and had to be replaced. And the team that came in and replaced it, I think, were superb. But it takes time to settle those kind of things down. So I think All Hallows was faced with very, very serious crises outside of the maybe the academic challenge.
What I think in times like this, particularly for nonprofits, and I've seen it, where members of boards of trustees or boards of governor start leaving an institution that they see sinking.
Yes.
Either for reasons not wanting to be liable for what may be going wrong with their fiduciary responsibility, or just sense of, I don't want to be part of this anymore. What kept you so involved in taking such leadership around in the finance committee and things like that? Because I was at some of the meetings with you, and I always valued your honest and candid comments and views, but you kept coming back in spite of some of the difficult numbers that we were presenting to you. So what kept you at All Hallows and involved?
I didn't see the point of quitting when people were in need. That was one point. I'd had this long attachment to All Hallows, and I just didn't feel there was an appropriate time just to abandon ship. They needed some expertise, and if a team could be put together, there was a chance that a residue of real value could result from it. But I just wasn't going to leave. That was it. Well,
it was. I think it's wonderful that you stayed. Are there were there expectations that you had for? You talk about outcomes in the business world, and higher ed doesn't always talk about outcomes, and certainly more reluctant to measure them. But were there outcomes that you expected, as you sat on the trustees or the board of governors for All Hallows, that you felt were met in terms of the education and the experience that students were having?
Yes, I think one of the problems which I saw was that when you have a crisis like that where the books aren't balanced, you've either got to cut your costs and get your income up. This is being very commercial about it now at this stage. But when you've got a lovely old establishment like this, there's only so far you can go in cutting costs. Then you've got to get the income up, and that meant getting student numbers up. And the courses that were being offered, if you could call it the mainstream courses, weren't generating enough numbers to get the numbers, the revenue numbers up, and they had to expand the width of those, but the government aid wasn't going to be made available for those courses. So that was very difficult to do, and I think that changed from the traditional maybe theology-based course to the psychology-based courses which was contemplated. didn't probably happen fast enough. And I think the other part of it was, to answer your question, I felt that within All Hallows, when you come inside the gates, that there's a sort of an oasis here that historically has a tradition that's of great value, that the people who've come here have really respected it, and that, if you could call it, the Catholic Church in Ireland didn't really recognise the nugget that was here compared to some of the other establishments which wouldn't have those traditions or that charisma. And they seem to think in silos. The Vincentians thought, I think about the Vincentians, the Archbishop thought about that part of his diocese. There was no coming together saying there is really a nucleus here that is of real value in a world where social enterprise has to be developed, the not-for-profit sector has to be developed, and the church has some role in promoting those values.
Yeah.
And I think the absence of that energy and vision was a disappointment.
Yeah. Is there some thoughts you have on why the church, why the Archbishop and the Archdiocese didn't see? Because I always sensed that there was value in modern day from the Archdiocese. Certainly they own the property and some other connections, but like you say, I didn't see any, especially as things were coming to an end, there was any interest on the Archdiocese. No. And granted, they didn't have the money, but it wasn't just about money. I mean, it was about endorsing programs. It was about partnering in some of the educational endeavors. Any sense of what that was about, or is it just
maybe there are too many problems? Short thinking. I think maybe there are too many problems. They saw this as a financial exercise rather than just a support exercise. Because I think if they had said publicly that this was worth supporting, it would have possibly have been worth supporting. Now, what shape the end result would be, I'm not quite sure. But there was a nucleus there, I think, that had merit and that the church needed.
I've been struck by the number of Catholic schools at the third level that are being absorbed within the clusters of the state institutions. And there, at least when I was here and then keeping in touch after I left, there wasn't any sense of loss, I guess, by the Archdiocese or any of the dioceses with regard to Catholic education at this level. And it's such a, I think what we value in the United States is it's for many of us that have been in Catholic education, it's one of the last opportunities to engage young adults who are still in that kind of formative years to be able to make a connection with and wrestle with the issues of the church, and at the same time find value in their faith and how their faith interacts with their work experience. That seems to be a loss here now in Ireland. Is that something you sense or concerned about?
I think, very much so. I think the leadership of the church has been battered by all of these sex-related scandals and money scandals and so forth, and has shown a great, I think, lack of confidence in stepping forward with leadership ideas. And there is a gap. There's an extremely hostile media, hostile press, and they seem to put their head down below the ramparts and won't put it up. I remember when Patrick McDevitt came and he talked about the mission of St. Vincent de Paul. And St. Vincent de Paul in Ireland would be one of those organisations that has huge credibility, huge. And he said that this is an anchor on which we could base a lot of what we're going to do going forward. And I thought there was a lot of merit in what he was talking about. But I think in general the church has lost contact with the youth. And there are no charismatic figures there that are stepping forward to try and fill that gap.
I'm not sure they know what to do. That's the problem. And it's a tough issue. We're facing it too in the States, but it's a very difficult issue. But you don't get a sense. I worked with one of the bishops here who was with the bishops' council on education, and there wasn't much interest in having even a conversation about it. And the first reaction is, well, we don't have any money to give you. And I said, that's not the point. The point is, you're losing a major component in Catholic education, and but it didn't want to be pursued. And I think it is unfortunate. I don't know how you turn it around at this point. Yeah.
To me, that was the most disappointing aspect of the whole experience here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that they've picked up a couple of programs that Eileen O'Houlihan runs, but it's not going to replace what they're losing with St. Pat's and Mater Dei and some of the other schools that are being absorbed.
I came to some of the presentations which the ALBA students made, and I mean, it was really moving to hear the difference that getting a third level degree made to many of those people who were nowhere near the jobs market or the for-profit sector, but just the sheer improvement in their own quality of life, the meaning that it gave to their lives and so forth. That was, for me, a great tribute to what All Hallows has been able to do for many people.
When I came, the stories I heard almost immediately were from the Aer Lingus employees that had been laid off and were part of the program here in Alba. And then what struck me was the number that talked about it. It was life-saving. Some were so despondent, and this gave them a lifeline. And I think those are just remarkable.
They are,
testimonies to what All Hallows did. Yeah.
They're a huge endorsement of that program and what they did.
Yeah.
And we also heard some of the younger undergraduate students talking about their, aspirations for life. And they're a million miles away from the type of output that many of the other universities are talking about. They're great people. Yeah. So it was lovely to be part of that.
What were some of those values you heard them talking about? What was meaningful to them or helpful to them in that education here?
Well, I think going out and working with other people and helping people to develop, being prepared to take on challenges with the underprivileged, working in parishes, giving leadership, particularly giving some leadership. For the undergraduates, they were the qualities that were there. For the ALBA students, it was primarily finding a form of self-fulfillment that they would be able to meet their own challenges, whatever they were, much better.
I mentioned before the young lady that we ran into in Dingle who had hoped to come here to do a master's degree. She worked for a social service agency and wanted to get a master's in management, nonprofit management, but she wanted it for her own skill development. But there was something about All Hallows education that she had heard about and all that she found really valuable. She was terribly disappointed that she couldn't, that the school was closing, and I think a great deal of her disappointment was there was nowhere else to go to get what she saw was here. And I taught in the summer program with Pat Murphy when he came over from DePaul, the shared program during the summer, where so many of the Irish folks involved in social services here, St. Vincent de Paul Society and all. And you could see the real contribution that All Hallows was making to those folks who were active in the field. And many of them told me the same story, that this is the education that they felt they needed to be better in their work and certainly help advance in their work. And they're making many sacrifices to be in those kind of jobs in the first place because of the salaries and all. Yeah. But there was something that they found great value in here at All Hallows.
Because one of the jobs that I do as well, it's the only other, I'm chairman of a company in the Northside Partnership which provides training for long-term unemployed people. This is just a part-time role. And we take on 50 people every year who would be long-term unemployed. And they're mainly single mothers, ex-drug abusers, ex-prison people who live on the north side, probably have never had a reasonable job, and through the government schemes have to go and get some work experience to qualify for their income. And 90% of them wouldn't have their leaving cert. So we came up with a programme of combining work and education, working with the local Coláiste Dhuillig, so that when they leave after 2 years, they have a basic leaving cert. And the difference that makes to them in terms of their self-esteem, they're probably the only person in their family or extended family who has reached that level.
Wow.
So it's a huge added value to them as a person. And then when you go to what All Hallows was offering, and it takes that and brings it up to another level and a higher level again, and just basically says the sky is the limit. So that was the kind of value that I saw that is being lost. And I don't see it being spoken about in the same way in any of the other institutions.
I think Alba is still finding it, still struggling to find a home.
That's a pity.
It's a very unique program, but for people, as you're speaking about, at a level of self-esteem, that first generation to be going to college or university, part of it is not just trying to get a better job, but it's really their own personal development and growth. And so it is too bad that that can't continue.
Yes.
Or you would hope that it would. Yeah. And I think that was true with many of the undergraduates that I had encountered, that many were first generation in the family to be going at this level and to be successful in a place like DePaul. I met a number of traveler students when I was here, and it was remarkable to me the sense of value that they had here and the lack of discrimination, the sense of acceptance.
It was wonderful.
It really was, And from what I have come to learn about the traveler community in Ireland, it's a pretty remarkable experience for these folks here.
Because I think, like, society as a whole is going to be facing very big challenges with the way all of the work functioning jobs are going, and that with globalization, jobs can really move suddenly from one area to another area. Large tracts of people can be left unemployed. I mean, if you look at, say, Intel, which is on the west side of Dublin, employing 4,000 or 5,000 people in a high-tech business that probably has a life cycle of maybe 10 years, and then it has to change itself utterly and totally to continue. For people who are in that or in similar businesses, the changes that they're going to be hit with if they're left out of a job are dramatic. They never applied when I was growing up or in a job. And I have 3 sons here, and they would all be working in jobs that they certainly won't be finishing their life in the companies that they started with. So there's a whole set of social values, and I think what All Hallows was giving to people was a set of personal confidence, of being able to take that and move with it.
Well, we're almost out of time. Is there anything in particular, Jim, that you'd want to leave, story or anything that...
Well, I think I just mentioned most of them. I think the most moving interactions for me were the presentations by the Alba students, who said it all in terms of what it had done for them.
Good.
And I felt it was an honour to be part of that in some way.
Thank you. I appreciated your working with you when I was here, and your dedication and commitment to All Hallows. And I think you were very frank in a good way and honest in that finance committee work. And it was important what you brought to that, because I think it would have been easier to just hope for the best and wait for divine intervention or something. But I think you helped all of us who are in administration to really focus on, where we were at financially and how to best go through the wind down. Which was unfortunate, but it was important to do, and do it the right way.
Yeah, and I think it was done the right way. I think they did a very good job. So, pity that was the purpose of it. Would have been nicer to have something else.
Absolutely, but that would not have been right to do that.
No. Okay.
So, anyways, thanks, Jim.
Okay, Tim.